The November air bit against my cheeks as I walked up the stone pathway to Daniel's front door, balancing a pumpkin pie in both hands. The house looked beautiful from the outside string lights curled around the porch. The smell of roasted turkey already drifting through the crisp air. I had always imagined, in my younger years, that one day this very moment would feel like the reward for decades of sacrifice. My son, with a fine home, his own family, and me welcomed warmly at his table. When Celeste opened the door, her smile was polite but quick, the kind of smile one saves for a neighbor passing by. She kissed my cheek, murmured a greeting, and ushered me in. The warmth of the house hit me immediately, carrying voices, laughter, and the clatter of cutlery. I walked into the dining room, my eyes naturally searching for the seat where I always sat, end of the long oak table. To Daniel's right, but the space was different this year. Where my chair once stood, a heavy cushioned seat, now sat a taller, polished chair dressed with a decorative cushion. My place had been pushed to the far edge, replaced by a smaller, rickety wooden chair I didn't recognize, its legs uneven against the hardwood floor. My pie felt heavier in my arms as I stood there staring. I heard voices float in from the kitchen. Celeste's voice, hushed but clear enough. "Your mother's old. Just keep her comfortable. But let's make sure my mom feels special today. She deserves the best seat." Daniel chuckled softly, a sound I once cherished, now laced with indifference. "Of course. Don't worry about it." I stood still, pretending to admire the table settings, though my heart clenched with every word. The china glistened under the chandelier, the silverware aligned like soldiers on parade. I remembered the years I clipped coupons to afford holiday meals, how I'd serve Daniel first, always saving the best pieces for him, sometimes going without myself. I once dreamed this table, his table, would be the symbol of love passed down. Instead, I found myself staring at a wooden chair that creaked when I touched it, a quiet signal that my place had already been taken. I set down the pie, pressed my hands flat on the linen tablecloth, and drew a long breath, steadying myself for the evening yet to come. Dinner began with a flourish. Daniel guided his mother-in-law, Lenora, to the head of the table as though she were a visiting dignitary. Her silk scarf caught the light, and her bracelets chimed when she lifted her hand for everyone to sit. Guests rose slightly in acknowledgement, glasses already raised in her honor. I lingered near my small chair, careful not to draw attention, though the sting of her placement at the head struck deeper than I cared to admit. Daniel stood tall, carving knife in hand, his face lit with boyish eagerness. I remembered that eagerness once being directed at me, how he used to beam when I placed food on his plate. Tonight, however, his smile belonged to Lenora. He carved with precision, the knife slicing into the golden turkey, juices spilling across the cutting board, and the first generous portion, the tender breast meat, was placed neatly on Lenora's plate. "To Lenora," Celeste chimed, her glass raised high, for gracing us with her warmth and wisdom. The others echoed her words, and Daniel clinked his glass against his mother-in-law's with pride. My own cup remained untouched, heavy in my hand. I watched, a hollow ache settling in my chest. It wasn't jealousy of Lenora. It was the quiet erasure of myself. I had worked double shifts for years to ensure Daniel had turkey on the table at all. Even when our money barely covered rent, I could still see him at 8 years old, feet dangling off the kitchen stool as I pulled a tiny bird from the oven. My hands blistered from shelving books all day at the library and pouring coffee all night at the diner, yet I smiled, as though exhaustion were joy. He had devoured that small meal, looking up at me with gratitude shining in his eyes. Now those same eyes sparkled, but not for me. They sparkled for the woman draped in silk, for the mother-in-law who had given him nothing but presents. The memory of my blistered hands clashed with the sound of laughter around me, and I felt my heart tighten as though it were being carved along with the turkey. Daniel reached for another cut, still serving Lenora with practiced devotion, while my plate remained empty, waiting. The plates clinked as Daniel moved down the table, each slice neat and deliberate, each gesture met with nods of approval. Celeste's family praised his carving, their voices warm and animated, laughter spilling into the room. I sat quietly, hands folded on the table, waiting as I always had, patient and trusting, sure that when my turn came, it would carry some echo of the gratitude he once showed me. At last, Daniel reached my place. He didn't pause, didn't look me in the eye. With a quick flick of his knife, he scraped fatty skin and gristly edges onto my plate. A loose bone tumbled with a dull clatter against the porcelain, cold, unappetizing pieces. Scraps. He smiled faintly, distracted, already turning to serve another guest. The table erupted with more laughter, Celeste's uncle clapping Daniel on the back. "Perfectly done, son," someone said, and glasses were lifted once more. I forced a smile, though it felt brittle, my lips trembling at the corners. My eyes lowered to the mess on my plate, the meat barely edible, and I swallowed the sting rising in my throat. I remembered the Thanksgivings of years past. When money was scarce and the bird was small, I would set aside the choicest cuts for Daniel, pretending I preferred the dry ends, or nothing at all. I skipped meals more times than I could count, so his plate would be full, convincing myself hunger was lighter when born for love. Watching him eat was enough, I told myself back then. But tonight was different. Tonight the gesture wasn't sacrifice, it was dismissal. I realized this was no oversight, no careless mistake. It was a message. Unspoken, yet loud, I had been moved to the margins, fed what remained. My heart hardened in the silence, and something inside me cracked open with clarity. I set down my fork, my appetite gone, my pride burning hotter than hunger. Pushing back the fragile wooden chair, I rose slowly, unnoticed by the laughter that carried on without me. My coat hung by the door, and I reached for it with steady hands, the noise of the dining room fading behind me as I stepped away. I slipped into my coat, the familiar weight settling on my shoulders like an old friend. No one noticed. Daniel was at the far end of the table, laughing loudly, raising a toast with Lenora beside him. My absence was swallowed by the noise of their celebration. I closed the door gently behind me, letting the cold air rush in as the sound of their laughter faded into silence. The drive home blurred before me, the headlights of passing cars streaking through tears that refused to stay contained. Snowflakes tapped against the windshield, melting into streaks that mirrored the wetness on my cheeks. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, steadying myself through the ache that sat like a stone in my chest. When I finally stepped into my apartment, the warmth of the radiator greeted me, but it did little to thaw the chill I carried inside. I set my purse on the counter and walked straight to the closet where I kept the old photo albums. Dust rose when I pulled them down, the kind that collects when memories are left untouched for too long. Page after page unfolded Daniel at his kindergarten play, holding his diploma, blowing out candles at birthdays, always smiling, always at the center of the frame. And there I was, behind him, blurred in the background, the one who made sure the moment was possible but rarely acknowledged. My thoughts drifted further back, to the day my husband's heart failed and left me with a boy to raise alone. I remembered the nights I worked until dawn, the day I mortgaged the family home just to cover Daniel's tuition, convincing myself it was an investment in his future and in the love he would one day return. The silence of my apartment pressed in as I whispered into the stillness. Respect is love made visible. He's forgotten both. I closed the album, my hands steady now, and sat with the truth that had finally settled inside me. Tomorrow, I knew, I would need to reckon with more than just memories. The night stretched long, and sleep refused to come. Instead, I found myself cataloging the years as if they were lines in an unbalanced ledger. Every sacrifice tallied clearly in my memory, every entry marked with love that now felt squandered. I saw myself younger, bone-tired but determined, shelving books at the library until closing. The scent of ink and paper clung to me as I rushed across town for the morning shift at the diner, pouring coffee for strangers while my own son still slept. My feet ached. My back protested, yet I carried on because his future demanded it. I remembered the winter Daniel fell ill. The medical bills towered higher than anything I had ever faced, and I slipped off my wedding ring, the last piece of my husband I still wore. The pawnshop owner weighed it in his hand like it was nothing, then slid a few bills across the counter. I walked home empty-fingered but determined, telling myself the love it symbolized would live on in Daniel's recovery. And how many meals had I skipped? Too many to count. I'd spoon an extra portion onto his plate, then push aside my hunger with a glass of water. Watching him eat had been my only nourishment. But as I sat at my small kitchen table now, a folder of papers spread before me, a truth emerged that Daniel had forgotten, or perhaps never bothered to know. The house he claimed as his own, the one filled with laughter that night, still bore my name on the deed. Years ago, when I helped him buy it, I never fully transferred ownership. The mortgage was long paid, but the title remained mine. The realization settled in me like a steady flame after all the years of giving. I still held something he could not take for granted. I closed the folder, my fingers tracing the embossed seal, and felt the faint stirrings of resolve for what must come next. The next morning, I bundled my papers into a worn leather folder and drove into town. The sky was gray, the kind that pressed low and heavy, yet I felt curiously light as I stepped into Mr. Halverson's office. He had been my lawyer for years, a man who spoke little but always listened well. "Marjorie," he greeted, adjusting his spectacles. "What brings you in today?" I laid the folder on his desk. "It's time I make some changes. My will, the deed, all of it." His brows lifted, but he said nothing, only pulled a pen from his breast pocket and waited. With deliberate care, I explained the house, the savings, even the modest investments I had built over decades of work. I wanted them transferred, not to Daniel, as I had once planned, but to a charity for struggling mothers. And the rest, I told him firmly, should go to my granddaughter, Clara, the child he seldom called, the one who lived in the shadow of his new family. She, at least, deserved to know she was seen. Halvorsen wrote quickly, his pen scratching across the page, pausing only to clarify small details. When he looked up, his expression was a mixture of respect and quiet sadness. "Are you certain I'm certain?" I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. I signed the documents, my name flowing across each page like the closing of a chapter. As I set the pen down, a weight lifted from me, replaced by a steady calm. "Love," I whispered, almost to myself, "is not measured in inheritance. It is measured in respect." And as I left his office, coat pulled tight against the chill, I knew Daniel's illusions of entitlement would soon collapse. The first call came on a rainy Tuesday. Daniel's voice was steady at first, but I heard the strain beneath it. His business, once so loudly praised at every family gathering, was faltering. A contract had fallen through, a partner pulled out, and suddenly, the debts outweighed the profits. "I just need a little help," he said, trying for confidence. "A loan. Maybe. You've always been there for me." Once, I would have answered without hesitation, selling something or working longer hours. But this time, I let the silence hang before answering. "I can't, Daniel. Not this time." His pause was long, his disbelief almost audible. He muttered something about understanding, though the edge in his tone betrayed him. Weeks later, another call came, this time sharper. Celeste's voice joined in, brittle and cold. Resentment dripped from every word, as though I had committed betrayal by refusing to be their safety net. Then came the unraveling. Lenora, so regal at the head of the Thanksgiving table, was quick to retreat when the money thinned. Her presence dwindled, her support evaporated, leaving Daniel and Celeste to face the bills alone. The final blow landed when Daniel dug through old papers and realized the truth. The deed to his grand house was never his. My name still stood in ink, firm and undeniable. His frantic call came late one evening, demanding answers. But I simply told him the truth he had never cared to learn. His voice cracked with fury and fear, but my heart felt no obligation to steady him. By then, I had already packed my belongings and moved to a small apartment in a coastal town in Connecticut. The rooms were sunlit and modest, with a window that opened to the sound of waves and gulls. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet belonging of a home that was wholly mine. And as I placed a small vase of roses on the windowsill, I knew Thanksgiving would look very different the next year. The year turned quickly, and November came again. I heard through a cousin that Daniel's Thanksgiving was small, this time just him, Celeste, and their children at a table that once overflowed with guests. The shine had worn from his voice, and the laughter I remembered from the year before had gone quiet. Finances were strained, and with Lenora's support gone, the celebration was reduced to something far more modest. Meanwhile, my own table in Connecticut filled with a warmth I had not felt in years. I invited neighbors from the building, a few women from church, and most importantly, my granddaughter Clara. She came running through the door with a handmade card, her eyes bright, her presence a reminder that love still grew where it was nurtured. The table was simple roasted chicken instead of turkey, bowls of root vegetables, bread I had baked myself. No extravagant decorations, no speeches of grandeur. Yet when the plates were passed, each portion was generous, and no one was overlooked. Everyone was served equally, laughter rising naturally between bites. I placed roses in jars along the windowsill, their crimson petals catching the late afternoon light. A quiet symbol of life renewed. As the meal wound down, a knock startled us. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there. His face was thinner, eyes shadowed with worry. He didn't ask how I was, didn't mention the months of silence between us. He only said, "I need help. Mom, just a little, to get back on my feet." Behind me, Clara's laughter drifted from the table, a reminder of what I stood to protect. I met his gaze, steady but calm, and with a quiet firmness, I shook my head. Then I closed the door gently, not in anger, but in final clarity. I turned back to my guests, the warmth of their presence wrapping around me, and knew I had chosen peace over scraps at last. Morning light spills into my apartment, painting the walls in soft gold. The ocean outside hums its endless song, steady as breath itself. On the windowsill, my roses lean toward the light, their petals unfurling, tender and defiant against the salt air. I trim them carefully, placing the freshest blooms into a clear glass jar. Their scent lingers, a reminder that beauty can thrive even after being cut from its roots. I often find myself here, at this window, watching gulls wheel above the waves. The world feels smaller, quieter now, yet infinitely more honest. The noise of strained dinners, the biting laughter at my expense, the weight of being overlooked, they no longer cling to me. Instead, I have chosen dignity, and dignity has chosen me back. I whisper to the roses. Perhaps to myself, my son gave me leftovers. But respect is the meal that keeps us alive. The words settle in the air. Not bitter, but resolute, like a truth long waiting to be spoken. Clara visits often. She brings her drawings and her questions, her innocent curiosity untangled from the expectations that once smothered me. Together we walk the shoreline, our shoes filling with sand, her laughter tethering me to a future brighter than I thought possible. Through her, I see a line of love unbroken, not by inheritance, but by presence. Neighbors stop by with fresh bread or stories, and I find myself surrounded not by obligation, but by choice. This little community, stitched together by kindness, has become my true family. Blood gave me a son who handed me scraps. Life has given me people who offer their best, even when their best is simple. At night, when the tide swells and the sky deepens, I sit by the window with a cup of tea and let the sound of the sea carry me back through the years. I no longer ache for what might have been. I no longer hunger for a seat at a table that never honored me. My peace lies here, in this small apartment, in the bloom of roses, in the company of those who see me as worthy. And so I ask myself, and perhaps anyone who will listen, if betrayal wore your child's face, would you forgive or finally breathe free